We'll take a question. I'll answer it if there's an addendum to the question. We'll take it at that time. We'll try to keep moving so that each table could have their question answered. So we'll look at tables once, and we'll go back through a second time. We'll start over.
Fine, she's going to make me ask. How often do you have to wear the collars, or what's the rule with the...
What's the ruler? What's the ruler? What's the rule? What's the get up with the black and white, black shirt, white collar? The actual black shirt, white collar, it's there's nothing actually symbolic of it in terms of like why this kind of collar, why this kind of button-down shirt. It certainly originated from more of a cassock, which would have been all black, trimmed in white. And then over the course of centuries, it just takes a different form in the century. So now it's pants, black shirt, button down the front with a white collar. How it will be in the next century, I don't know, but it'll probably be similar in black. I think there's a symbol to it that the black is a little bit of a death to life, a little to culture, to a death to appearance or fashion. And so the priest wears black is a simple statement that it's really not all that important what I wear. I let my clothes kind of disappear in the midst of everything else happening. Currently, black's pretty fashionable, so it works. Why do some priests wear the collar all the time? Why do some wear it only a little bit? Why do some never wear it? There's no rule on it. Canon law does say that the priest should have a professional attire when ministering in a sacramental form or in a formal capacity. I can only speak for myself. I can't always speak for my brother priest. For me, when I wear the black shirt, the white collar, I just feel like, it's not like you're ever off duty. I'm never off duty. But I feel like I'm functioning at a much more attentive sort of way. When I put that on in the morning, I feel like, okay, I'm ready for the day. Whatever the Lord brings at me, I'm kind of ready for it. So for me, it's a professional attire that I wear. It helps me to keep mindful that I'm really at the service of the people that I'm called to, because it's what I'm wearing. And don't get me wrong, I love wearing jeans. I love wearing t-shirts and a sweatshirt. I love wearing Crocs. But, when I'm at St. Tom's, I'm there for you. So I should, my attire helps me be reminded of that. For me also, it's just very simple. I mean, it's a real freedom not to have to worry about having the most pressed shirt and the most fashionable tie. It's a freedom for me not to have to worry about that every morning. It's also a freedom not to have to worry about that economically. While I still put forth money for my black shirt, my white collar, my black pants, I don't have to put forth the kind of money that a person in a professional realm needs to with their clothes. So for me, there's a simplicity to it that I'm drawn to. There's a ease to it that says my focus, my mind, my attention needs to be on something else. So it's just really easy for me to throw on the black shirt, the black pants, the white collar every day. I don't have to think about it. The only thing I think about is it cold enough that I have to wear a vest or a jacket? That's about the only thing I think about. And that's sometimes a whole lot of thinking for me. So I know my brother priests, they all have a kind of different philosophy of it, and they wear it in different sort of capacities, and all that looks kind of good. Your table, what question do you have for us? Who's your spokesperson?
Why can only men be priests?
Why can only men be priests? Great question. I think we'd go back to the Bible, our biblical origins, and we go back to the intention. Biblically, we recognize that, again, the priesthood was established at the Last Supper in union with the institution of the Eucharist. It was by deliberate design that he called forth only his men, his apostles, to be at that Last Supper. He had very close relations with women as well as other disciples in his ministry for 3 years. But at that particular moment when he established the priesthood, he established it only with the men, his apostles. So there's a biblical foundation to it. There's also a historical foundation to it. It's always in the history of the church had that continuity in repeating what Christ instituted at the Last Supper. The priest also stands in his person. And without question, women, you have the dignity of representing Christ as well. But in his humanity, Christ came to us as man. And so the maleness of the priesthood is also a reminder of the physical form of which God took when he came in the flesh. He came as a man. There's also kind of an ontological kind of perspective that ultimately, remember, we're all called to the wedding. We're all called to this idea of to be one with Christ in a nuptial union, okay? And that oneness with Christ in the nuptial union is foreshadowed in the oneness of husband and wife, you know? And that in that physical union, that husband and wife union, if there's a sense of receptivity of the woman's part and a sense of presenting oneself in the part of the male. So even there's a sort of receptivity of the bride and an offering of self of the groom. Okay, this is kind of, you know, an issue of gender as well as masculine and feminine, right? This is how it is in heaven, that Christ is the one who offers himself to us, and we as his bride receive him. The priesthood is the same thing. The priest, you know, is the groom, the church is the bride. The priest offers himself in service to the church, and the church receives him. Okay, so there's kind of that ontological perspective as well. So those would be three. So, any other additions to that or need for clarification on that? Good question. Thank you, Jerry. Ms. Cable?
Okay. So like all the priests can be traced back to the apostles. Can you like trace back your line of like priests and bishops to like which apostle like you originally from? I guess. So, like, a tree that you can trace.
I can trace it back to Bishop Huffman. That's about it. Bishop Huffman can probably trace it back further than
Yeah.
that.
Are there like records you can go to figure
Yeah,
that out?
absolutely. Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Then the church has those records. So he could. I mean, I could if I wanted to. I'm not sure I'd be able to trace it back to the exact 1 to 12 or 11, but I could certainly trace it back to, oh my gosh, probably to the 500s, I bet, 400s, 300s, somewhere in there. I just don't know how the records, sacramental records are kept in the earliest church. But the church has a great sacramental records, and that's why the church is often used when you do studies of families and genealogy. But it could happen, yeah. I don't think I could trace it back to the 11, but trace it back pretty darn far. Good question.
I guess
Paul?
we were talking about the different kinds of priests. If you could briefly touch on different types of religious life in the priesthood.
And why you chose that.
Okay, why God chose me as a diocesan. Maybe I can pick up that question, why God chose me as a diocesan in the vocation story. So, well, first of all, make the distinction. There are men who are called to ordination. And there are two forms of ordination, well, actually three. You can be called to the form of diaconate, priesthood, and then bishop. Okay, and all three levels kind of have it's a kind of a stepping step. It's not a hierarchy, you might say, but there's a kind of a first a deacon, a priest, and then a bishop. And those are the sacrament of ordination. In that middle level, the priesthood, there are different expressions of the priesthood. Okay, so what you have before you, I am a diocesan priest, and there are what on the other end, or the other beside there are brother priests called religious order priests. The function of the priest, whether diocesan or religious order, is the same. They sacramentally bring Christ to his people. But kind of the lived expression of it's different. As a diocesan priest, my authority over me is my bishop, and therefore I am somewhat geographically situated in Northwest Ohio, in this diocese. I won't really travel beyond Northwest Ohio. I will typically serve people beyond this Northwest Ohio area, unless my bishop grants me permission to do that. As a diocesan priest, I focus a lot of my work on ministry at parish level. There may be some school work, some diocesan work. Typically, 75% of diocesan priests are involved in parish work. Now, there's religious orders. Those would be things like Franciscans, Jesuits, Brothers of St. John. There's all sorts of them. I'm just going to have a lot in the brain. Dominicans, and these are all religious orders. Religious orders are typically founded by a man, a priest, a community. So you have like St. Dominic who established the Dominicans. You have St. Ignatius who established the Jesuits. You have St. Francis who established the Franciscans. These religious orders are expressions of priesthood lived out with this particular charism. And the charism is particular to their founder. So they lived their priesthood as a Franciscan in the spirit and the charism of St. Francis. Or they lived their priesthood as a Jesuit in the spirit of Ignatius. And that spirit of Francis and the Franciscans, the spirit of Ignatius, and the Jesuits, the spirit of Dominic and the Dominicans, is lived in a different way. A Franciscan spirituality, a Franciscan charism, will call that priest probably to serve maybe more in areas of poverty or in maybe some areas of social ministry versus parish life. They may be called to particular work within retreat houses. The Jesuit priest will be called to live his priesthood probably within the realm of higher education or in the realm of education as a teacher or professor. So it's priesthood, which is the same sacramentally, what they do, but it's lived out with a different flavor. Okay. Now, that's ordination. Now, remember, there's also religious life. So there are some men who will be called to religious life, but not necessarily ordination. They might be called to the Franciscans, the Jesuits, the Dominicans, as a religious brother. So they go into those communities and they take the promise of celibacy, obedience to their superior, and the promise of prayer, but they will serve as a brother, not as a priest. Therefore, they won't function sacramentally in any capacity. Religious life for women. We've had a night on, the Dominican sisters came and spoke. Okay, so that's kind of a different religious life. Is a religious brother or religious sister is different than ordination. And tonight we're just kind of focusing on ordination. And I'll address the question of why diocesan priesthood for me in this story. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely.
All right. How about the table here?
Yeah, we were just wondering about sort of the like when you're praying in divine office or even the Mass, and I guess with the new translation, kind of keeps you on your toes, and kind of mentioned the other night or over the weekend, sort of the intentionality that you have as you're praying these prayers, and like does the sort of devoteness kind of how do you kind of deal with that or personally or anything like that?
The roteness of the prayer, because it was prayed in year 15. I've been praying in divine office for 20 plus years now, maybe even 25 years. And so that red book has been stuck in my hand for 25 years, and that hasn't changed. The Mass has been the same for 15 years, slightly changed more recently. How do you avoid it becoming this rote? By God's grace, I haven't struggled with that so much in praying the Mass. The Mass, by God's grace, is always as fresh to me. Even though if you go to daily Mass, you know that I pray the Eucharistic prayer to almost every day, 95% of the time. And that, by God's grace, it hasn't gotten old. It hasn't gotten rote. I don't know, the words are powerful, even if it's been prayed, 750 billion times. It's still somehow fresh. It's a mystery of the Mass, probably, that it's never old. The breviary, I do struggle a little bit with that. I do struggle with, I got the book in front of my breviary in front of me, and I pray in Psalm 51 as you do every Friday morning, the Psalm of Contrition, the Psalm of St. David. Lord have mercy on me. And I've prayed that psalm or other psalms, and I get to the end of it, and glory be to the Father, and I'm thinking, what psalm did I just pray? That I've done that, and then I have to go back and repray that psalm. It helps me if I pray the psalm out loud. Not that out loud such as you hear me, but I whisper it under my breath. That helps to keep it up. So sometimes when you pray just in your own mind, I struggle with focus a little bit. I don't know, but the breviary for me is a great. It's very comfortable. It feels like a safe place. You know how it is when you go to church. I got my favorite seat in the church. If you ever go in there when I'm praying, I got my same seat. Don't sit in it. And it's not the seat it's not the red cushion seat. But there's this comfort there. And I love to pray in our church. It's a beautiful church, and when nobody's in there, only a few people and God are in there. It's just really beautiful. The space makes a difference in prayer. The breviary is like that for me a bit. I don't have to be in the church to pray to get this feeling of security, this feeling of warmth, this feeling of my Lord is near, because I've experienced Him in these pages before, and I probably will experience Him again as I sit down and pray. So there's something about the breviary that's still very life-giving, even if it's been prayed many, 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 many times. Christian?
What's required of a priest
There's some discussion about that, for sure, without question. It's a morning prayer, evening prayer. And no one's ever has argued against that. Some would claim that the priest also should pray the night prayer, noon prayer, as well as the office of readings. Others would contest that that's not necessary. So, I pray for sure morning prayer, evening prayer, and the office of readings. Night prayer I hit a good amount of time, but not every night. And noon prayer I don't hit at all. Sorry, so don't tell the bishop that. If the bishop holds me to that standard, he hasn't shared that with me. So, to be honest with you. Let's take a question.
Okay, if you're in a program to see if you want to become a priest, how do you know when they will pass it on to you? What's the decision with that?
Good question. So the question is, you're in seminary, and at what point do they tell you that you can go forward? That's a good question. Any thoughts? So this is kind of how it works. The formation in the seminary is pretty structured. The seminarian lives a very ordered life. He's got his morning prayer, evening prayer, mass, the ordered life in the studies. He has a spiritual director that he works with on a regular basis to talk about prayer life and spiritual life. He also has a whole formation board that he works with. And this formation board is like a priest, his advisors, teachers, and the formation board is, excuse me. The formation board is constantly helping the man evaluate his readiness to ordination. And so there's yearly evaluations that the person fills out, that he himself fills out, and then he's evaluated by the staff as well as his peers. Those evaluations are sent to his diocesan vocation director and his bishop. They review them as well. So, believe it or not, there's a lot of people involved in this one man's discernment for priesthood. And if at some point along the way, the formation board and anyone involved in this formation says, there's something there that just doesn't seem right, they'll share that with the man. And most of the time, it's kind of like, the person knows it. It's not like a surprise, just because there's a lot of transparency along the way. Yeah. It's a long process. Again, at the very least, it's going to be about 5 to 6 years. For diocesan priesthood, it could be as many as 8 years or 9 years, depending if they come into a college program. All right, it's supposed to be done by 1:15, because there's some important announcements. First, we have someone. So if a table has a really great question, and you really think this question is a question that everybody wants answered, you can be that bold, raise your hand and take it, versus going around every table. Don't be bashful. Oh, back here, yes.
Okay, so you're teaching about why homosexuality is wrong and why, because it's disordered, it's not what God's planned. So how would you respond if you're arguing with someone and they said basically, well, what's going to keep a homosexual man from being a priest? Why can't he do that? How would you respond to that?
What's the church's position on a man who feels like he's called to priesthood, but at the same time struggles with same-sex attraction? The church's official teaching is a man who has a deeply seated attraction to someone of the same sex cannot serve the church as a priest, cannot be called by Christ to the priesthood. Part of that, again, is because if it's so deeply seated, that priest probably may not understand the masculine nature of priesthood, which is making a gift of himself, versus the feminine nature to receive. So a deeply seated posture of attraction to the same sex eliminates that man from being a viable candidate to the priesthood. That person may have a lot of gifts to do other things in ministry, but wouldn't be able to serve the church as a priest. And that's where something with like the whole formation board, his own spiritual director, they come to that together, really. Again, it's a matter of transparency. The seminarian has to be transparent about that. if there's some sort of, something within them that they feel that draw, that attraction, they got to bring that out. They got to share about that. So,
Great answer, Father.
what's that?
Great answer.
Is that a good answer? Oh, God bless you. Bridget?
I think you have answered my question already, and I might have made, like, there's, okay, so something's in my head, and I might have made it up, I might have actually heard it once before, but, okay, so you know how Deacon Gary was here for a while, and then he was assigned to go someplace else, and Deacon Ed came in because Deacon Ed was ordained. Now, like, I feel like I had heard somewhere that, like, with you, like, it was, like, something about 8 years or something, I don't know, is that, like, is there, like, I don't know where I came up with that, or if I just heard it, or if I made it up myself.
Okay.
But is there something, because I know that on my trip back home, like most of my priests that have been at our church were really, really old and they retired, so I'm like, I can't really count 8 years. Because they retired or like
The way that
died or whatever, and so
The
like,
the deacon and the priest are both assigned in the diocese by the bishop, okay? Unless it's a religious order parish, such as St. Peter Paul, First Unitarian Church. Yeah, that's a religious order priest. So their priests are assigned through their provincial, their leader, but it actually goes through our bishop locally because it serves the diocese. For diocesan priests, though, again, in our diocese, and this changes in other dioceses, different policy. In our diocese, the deacon really is kind of is assigned indefinitely. It's not very common that a deacon is transferred from one parish to another. Deacon Gary's situation was just unique, okay? That we were having Deacon Ed ordained, he's a member of our parish, and there was a need for a deacon in another parish, so that's how that transfer happened. For a priest, a priest is made a pastor for 2 6-year terms. So typically 12 years total. Midway through, they do an evaluation and assessment whether the person should stay or be reassigned. So I'm in my 6th year. So I've been evaluated. I haven't seen the results of the evaluation yet, but so I don't know. They send out about, I think, 50 to 70 evaluations to random people, and those people send back their responses. I evaluate myself and send that into the bishop's office. They compile all that, and they'll give me feedback at some point how that evaluation went. It doesn't say based on that evaluation, but that becomes a piece of the pie for discerning the next 6 years. Typically, the next 6 years is pretty much granted, unless there's something that's of an unforeseen need or a circumstance that demands a transfer or a change.
so then after 6 years, then it like
And then after
you'll
12,
probably stay, then you get moved somewhere else. Or?
after a 12-year assignment in our diocese, it's pretty standard that priests would be transferred. There could be an exception to that, but it's pretty standard after 12 years, the pastor would be reassigned. That's particular to Diocese of Toledo. If you're outside the diocese, there might be a different policy in your own diocese.
Do you ever get to talk to the bishop about that? You sit down and have a conversation about like maybe where you want to go?
Yeah, at my 12-year term, when it comes up, I will have the opportunity to work with my search director. I will be able to share with the bishop and the personnel board maybe what I feel the Lord's calling me to. Yeah, so there would be a conversation that I get to be involved in that at that time. Paulie.
We've talked about this before, as far as like spiritual life, discernment, ordination, etc. The concept of like, just like anything else, like how we don't want to be students every single day when we wake up, and parents don't want to be parents every single day, how it's like the same in the priesthood, but there's that misconception that everyone's like, well, with a spiritual life or be a priest, they just wake up every day like, woo! So it's a little like getting through that.
No, yeah. Every day I wake up, I have to make a decision to be a good holy priest. I have to make that decision. It's an act of will. And yeah, without question, I mean, it's an act of will to pray. You know, to get out that bravery, to get to the chapel, to do my prayer. It's an act of will. Some days it's an easier act of will than other days, but most of the time it is. I have to deliberately say, this is what I'm going to do. There's a tremendous joy in the priesthood, tremendous joy. But there's a grind to it, you know. There's it's unrelenting, you know, it's unrelenting. And I think that, you know, here's just an example. Yesterday, how did it work out? We had 9 o'clock mass, and we had a 5 o'clock mass. I had between that time 3 meetings I had to do. One was a nursing home, one was a jail, and one was a staff thing. And all 3 of them came unexpectedly. And the expectation when the person asked, will you go out to the jail for this, or will you get to the nursing home, or can you meet with us, was as if in their world, their access to you must be immediate. Now, by God's grace, I was able to do what I could, but it's unrelenting in the sense of, wait a minute, I just put in 9 hours, I got another thing going on, but I want to, the call to service is unrelenting. And that's maybe where you feel at the end of the day, I go back to the rectory and I'm just really happy to be with just Jesus and me.
Yeah.
So there's an unrelentingness to it that really takes a grind, but I never, by God's grace, in 15 years, I have never wearied of the sacramental dimension of my priesthood. You know, it doesn't weary me. It gives me life. It's sometimes the pastoral management that gets wearisome.
Yeah.
But, Chris?
Like your specific ministries, like say like a exorcist or a military chaplain, how does that come about?
It comes about because the priest feels like God's calling him to that extra ministry. I have a very good priest friend who was serving our diocese, who was a diocesan priest, and in the first 7 years of his priesthood, he really kind of felt like he would be doing military chaplaincy for a term, and he did that. He asked the bishop to be released from the diocese for, I think it's a 4-year term, and he's currently serving in the military. To be an exorcist for the diocese is the same call. It's a call within a call.
Like, if you decide to leave the priesthood, are they still bound to them vows that they've promised to the bishop? Or?
If a man chooses to leave the priesthood, doesn't leave the indelible mark of the priesthood is still on his soul, he can be dispensed of the faculties in which he has been offered, and he can be dispensed of the promises he made. So he can't be like, I'm no longer a priest. Well, no, in reality, as you're a priest, you're just dispensed of those promises. You're released of the faculties that you've been given. So pretty serious stuff. It goes all the way to Rome, to the bishop of Rome.
So they can't say, oh, I met me a nice woman, I want to get married, oh, let's leave the priesthood, so they can't do that.
Nope. Just like the married man can't do that.
We talked about earlier a little bit about how like sometimes your distractions shouldn't be our distractions, I guess, or like if you have maybe issues with your faith, and if you feel comfortable sharing, are there times like when you struggle with your faith and with what you're teaching us, and maybe if you have, or just in certain areas, what you do sort of to work through that? Because I know, I'm sure a lot of us have issues with that.
You know, when it comes to doctrine of the faith, when it comes to the moral teaching of the faith, so it's doctrine, faith, morals, those are the things the church teaches infallibly. Will teach without error. And, you know, there's not a whole lot there that I really call into question. In part, I don't claim to have the brilliance to call it into question. You know, I say it often. I'm not the brightest candle on the cake. I'm burning, but I'm not the brightest candle on the cake. I don't feel like I have the authority to really call in to question something the church has for 2,000 years held as sacred or truth. You know, and so I'm not that brilliant. I mean, there are great brilliant minds out there, great theologians, who are always on the pressing edge, cutting edge, and they have that gift. I just don't. I mean, it's not that I take it blindly, but at the same time, I take what it is. I hold it as a treasure. The teaching of the church. I hold it as a treasure that really facilitates my priesthood in service of the people. So there's really nothing in the doctrine, in the morals, that I really struggle with personally. For me personally, I find it to be far more reassuring that when somebody comes to me who has a question of faith, you know, or has a question of moral life, that I can rely on this wisdom of the church to guide them, and I don't have to rely on my own wisdom, my own wit, or my own experience. That's just a beautiful gift that the Catholic Church offers the priest, and I find it more of a blessing in ministry than anything else. So I don't have anything where, like in 3 minutes, what do you say about the priesthood? I'll give you a really caveat version of the call. I didn't. God called me to priesthood. I didn't choose it. That's the plain, simple, short end of the story. From the very moment God conceived me in the womb of my mother, along with my father's help, He had a plan for me. And His plan was priesthood. It took me years to really know that that was the plan. It took me more years to conform my will so that I could accept that plan. And so at the age, give you the short story of it. I went right into a college seminary after high school, so I was 18 years old in the college setting, St. Minded Seminary in Indiana. It was a great location for a college experience. My college years were blessed. I have fond memories of them. A great education, very solid academically, a great formation, fantastic faculty and spiritual directors, and brother priests and seminarians who were there, very supportive and good. But at the age of 24, when I graduated, I don't know if I questioned so much whether God wanted me to be a priest, but rather I questioned whether I wanted to be a priest. And it really would take me about 3 years of being away from seminary and living the way I wanted to live. So when I was in senior year in college seminary, I needed 5 more years of graduate seminary to become a priest. I'm like, if you're a junior or senior, you know what I'm talking about here. I felt burned out of studies. The idea of going to grad school had no appeal to me. And then the call of priesthood was less and less appealing. At that time, this is verbatim, I wanted a car, I wanted a job, and I wanted a girlfriend. That's just what was on my heart. And even though in my environment, we're all talking about priesthood, we're all discerning priesthood, and we're all surrounded by tremendous classmates who were pursuing that, and many who would go on to grad school after we graduated. But for me, I wasn't with them. My heart wasn't properly ordered. It was ordered to the things of the earth, things that are passing. And I didn't have the depth of spirituality to be able to identify that and to let go of that. So after I graduated, it's good timing, I discontinued the seminary studies. Meaning I got the degree and ran. I didn't go bound to graduate school. I took up a job as an administrative aide in Catholic school system. So therefore I had my job, I got my car, and I started dating a beautiful girl. I got everything I wanted. I did that for 3 years. It was a great 3 years. I mean, I had discretionary income, I had a great job, I had a Nissan Sentra, red car, distinction, and a girlfriend who was fantastic. She was beautiful, she was Catholic, she was fun, my family loved her. We had a good relationship. Everything I wanted was given to me in the course of 3 years. I provided it all. In the course of 3 years, though, as good as life was, and as many great opportunities as I had, there wasn't a deep satisfaction. There was a surface satisfaction. But ultimately, when I'd be home by myself, something was unsettled. Something called me to more. Something said I wanted to be more radical. And I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I was like, wait a minute, why would I want to be more radical? Life is really comfortable. But that was the call, it's something more. That I'm not going to find the deepest longing, satisfaction of this longing in this life. So that called me to prayer. That called me to say my way is insufficient, and God's way is going to be the source to give me life. And so, my girlfriend and I, we talked, and we broke up, and I quit my job, and I sold my car, and I went back to seminary. So that little 3-year juncture, it happened because spiritually I wasn't in a place where I could give myself completely to Christ. And that's what the call to priesthood requires. You must give everything to Him. You must trust Him completely. And I just wasn't there. I wasn't, I was shallow, very selfish. So by God's grace, I overcame that shallowness. I moved away from a little bit of selfishness, and still have that tendency, enough to be able to know that God's way is a better way. And that drew me back to grad school. So that's the long and short of it. By the age of 33, I would be ordained by Bishop Huffman in the Rocher Cathedral on June 14th.